Welcome to the first episode of StorySLAM, brought to you by Kindle. I am Sulagna, your storyteller for this episode. And the story that I'm about to tell you has been inspired by true events. It's been beautifully written by our writer, Inayah Akhter. I was jolted awake as the train began to move out of Beverly Station. We were heading towards that station now. That station which had been deserted for 50 years. No trains made a stop there. I turned my eye I turned my eye to look over the compartment. Most of the passengers were fast asleep, while some groaned and yawned. None of them seemed bothered. I assume because they were from outside the state. Well, there was a general feeling of nonchalance. Like we couldn't possibly be arriving at that station anytime soon. I stirred in my seat and I turned towards the window when I heard the whistle of a train. It seemed distant, but as I looked at the window, I feared to look beyond it. However, curiosity won over, and I placed my hand on the handle. The coldness of the metal leaped around my entire body with iced energy. With shivering hands, I pulled the window open, and I was welcomed with dense darkness. I shrinked away, refusing to have any contact with this fresh darkness. But this dense darkness, in reality, was a spooky gray mist. This spooky gray mist swaddled the entire locality with its tranquil veil. The surrounding was lifeless and eerily silent. The reason being obvious: the deathly mist had smogged every tree, every post, every corner with no mercy. And suddenly, out of nowhere, came icy cold rain, tearing the veil of the mist into tiny pockets of steam. In that moment, I glanced at my watch. It was 9 p.m., and we were arriving at that station. I peered outside the window to have my first look at this place. It was in a desolate piece of land, many abandoned small buildings, and there stood that station. That station had a single tube well, and a few signboards here and there, and a ticket counter in the corner. The station was as spooky and as haunted as described in the papers. In that moment, I couldn't help myself. I went over every detail that I had read about this place. The story begins some 50 years ago. Mr. Wood's family recalls his experience at the station. Now, the station was placed in a small village with a few hundred dwellers, and all of them were educated. So they often had to travel for work, and so the railway had officially asked every important train to make a stop at this very station. Mr. Woods was its first station master, very responsible, and he carried out his work as meticulously and perfectly as a person could. So it was just a normal working day for him when he relaxed finally in his cabin after a long tiresome day, enjoying the scenic beauty that surrounded the station. In that moment, he suddenly sat up straight. He thought he heard a wailing cry of a woman. It sounded horrifying, so he looked out of his cabin, hoping to see something. In that moment, In the far signboard, he saw a shadowy figure leaning against the signboard, cladded in a white gown, and the long shiny hair of the woman was disheveled. The last train had already arrived and was soon to leave. Just as the train started to move out of the station, this shadowy figure started to chase the train, desperately hoping to maybe stop it. And she ran and ran, and suddenly there was a petrifying scream, and the trees surrounding the station started to shake vigorously. Mr. Woods was terrified at this. He couldn't think of anything but to run. And so he ran to his house. Once he got home, he took a shower and he kept telling himself it was just a nightmare, just something that he had imagined perhaps, and it was nothing to be worried about. He kept telling himself that. The next morning, he was a little apprehensive, but being the person he was, he went about his duty as normal. He went to the station, carried out each and every one of his work, and the day went by as normal. And it was almost time for the last train to arrive at the station. So he was again relaxed in his cabin when, unfortunately, the entire episode of the previous night repeated. Soon after, he even heard other passengers who disembarked the last train talking about the same white gown, the same disheveled hair, the same petrifying scream that was so scary to hear. But I suppose at some point Mr. Wood had had enough. So he decided he must come to truth at once. The next day, when he saw that same figure, he decided to go see her. And as he walked towards her, what he failed to realize was that that very figure had already turned towards him and was starting to move towards him. By the time he realized, he was already in her presence. And it was a deathly calm presence, a very strange one, the kind he did not like. And he no longer wanted to be in her presence. So he immediately turned around and he decided to run to his cabin, to hide and to put himself as far away as he could from this woman. But it was too late. A icy cold hand fell on his shoulder and pulled him back. And as he struggled to go further away, his arms and legs were also in her grasp. But Mr. Woods was athletic. So he jerked himself free and he ran to the cabin. He ran for his life. But later that night, Mr. Wood's body was found in his quarters. After him came two other station masters, but none of them made it out alive. Soon, the station, which was once busy with passengers at every hour of the day, was now empty, deserted even. Well, after about 50 years or so, a group of rationalists decided to spend the night in that very station. And they did. And not only that, all of them came out alive. They even told every person that the stories that was built around the station was the doing of some miscreants. They wanted the station to themselves to carry out illegal activities. And they also mentioned that the story from which the story which was being told was about an accident which had taken place in that very station. But it was a small accident, and a little girl happened to lose her life, and that was pretty much it. This little girl was Maya. Now, Maya was a young and charming girl who lived in the village, and she was a beautiful person to be around. However, She learned very early that her family had no love for her. Father did not earn enough money, and her mother had a mental illness. The mental illness was such that it even scared Maya herself. But Maya was a kind of person who would take care of everything, and so she did. She did all the household work, and after a long, tiresome day, surprisingly, this little girl would spend sleepless nights. She longed and she dreamed for a beautiful life, to be with someone who loved her and someone she could love too. And then came her childhood friend, Jake. Jake had received his education in the big city, and whenever he was in the village, he would give all his time to her. They would talk about Maya's life, what Maya wanted. He was joyful and humble. She loved spending time with him. But the time soon came when Jake too had to leave for the city for a job. But before he left, he made a promise to Maya that one day he would call and take her along with him and they would have a beautiful life together soon. But months passed by and Jake never contacted Maya. Thanksgiving passed by, Christmas passed by, and lonely Maya just kept waiting for that one call. But her wait was soon over. Jake called her one fine day and asked her to be ready. He informed her that a train would arrive at 9 p.m. at the station and she should meet him there. The joy in Maya's face was not comparable to anything in this world. She was so ready to start her new life, to finally be with the person who loved her, and she loved Jake very much too. So that day, she packed all her things and she even arrived early at the station, eagerly waiting for the train to come. And Jake was right. The train was there. It was 9 p.m. and a train came chugging along into the station. Oh, the excitement in Maya's face that time. She was so happy. She was so happy. But in all this happiness, she finally realized that Jake wasn't there. Why isn't Jake there? Jake was supposed to meet her there. Why isn't he there? Is he running late? Maybe he's running late. But it was too late. And the train had begun to move out of the station. Maya, at this point, did not know what to do. All she could think of was ways to stop the train, to stop it a little longer. Surely Jake would be here in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So the little girl did what she knew best. She jumped onto the track and she started running after the train, desperately hoping to make it stop. In that moment, she slipped and she fell. Along with her came down her entire world, crashing and crumbling into pieces. The little girl's body was smashed, but her eyes were still wide open, waiting for her unfaithful lover. In that moment, I was pushed out of the rail of thoughts that I was in because the train I was in had made a stop at that station. And it was the first train to make a stop there after 50 years. And I was scared. I did not want to believe this. This can't possibly be true. Ghosts are not real, I told myself. Remember what the rationalist said? That this was all a lie. None of this was true. But I couldn't help myself. I was just afraid, and all I could do to make myself believe was to look out at the station and tell myself, see, there's no such person. There's no Maya. Maya isn't real. And that's what I did. I peered out of the window, and there it was, the signboard, just as described in the paper. But to my surprise, there was also the same white gown and the same disheveled hair leaning towards the signboard. And all I could think in that moment is, Maya is real. Maya is real. Thank you.